Pretend to be my wife for $1,000. The words floated across the table like they belonged there, casual, confident, the kind of sentence a man might say when he had spent most of his life believing everything had a price. A few people nearby laughed softly, assuming it was a joke meant to entertain the expensive dinner crowd gathered beneath the crystal chandeliers of the Ashford Room, one of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants where the average steak cost more than most people's weekly grocery bill. Ethan Caldwell didn't laugh. He leaned back slightly in his chair, the polished silver of his watch catching the warm light as he studied the young waitress standing beside his table. Ethan Caldwell, 38 years old, founder and CEO of Caldwell Holdings, a man whose decisions moved markets and whose calendar was booked months in advance with board meetings, acquisitions, and private flights between cities that rarely slept. He had built a company worth billions, and somewhere along the way he had learned a quiet rule of the world he lived in. If you offered enough money, people usually said yes. The waitress, however, did not answer immediately. Her name tag read Lily Harper, the letters simple and unremarkable against the crisp white fabric of her uniform. She looked like dozens of other servers moving carefully between tables that evening, carrying trays, pouring wine, refilling water glasses that probably cost more than the plates themselves. Yet something about the way she stood was different. Calm, steady, not nervous, not flattered, not offended, just quiet. Ethan noticed it before anyone else did. Around them, the dinner crowd continued its quiet rhythm. Forks tapping plates, glasses clinking softly, conversations about investment portfolios and Hampton's real estate floating through the air like background music. Someone at Ethan's table chuckled again, assuming the young woman would smile politely and play along with the joke. After all, $1,000 was more than many servers made in a week. But Lily didn't laugh. She simply looked at the folded bills resting on the table, then back at the man who had placed them there. Ethan followed her gaze for a moment, noticing something he hadn't expected to notice at all. Her eyes weren't intimidated. They weren't impressed either. They were simply observing him, the way someone might watch an unusual moment unfolding in front of them. It was unfamiliar. Most people Ethan met reacted to him instantly, either eager to please him or eager to benefit from knowing him. Lily Harper didn't either. "It's just for tonight," Ethan said smoothly, his voice low enough to keep the conversation private while still carrying the effortless confidence of someone used to being heard. "One dinner. A short conversation. My business partner thinks a man without a wife must be impossible to trust." A small pause followed, the kind that stretches longer than expected, the kind that makes a room feel slightly quieter even when the noise hasn't changed. Ethan realized something unusual then. The waitress still hadn't taken the money. In fact, she hadn't moved at all. Across the dining room, another server hurried past carrying a tray of wine glasses. A jazz piano melody drifted softly from the bar. Outside the tall windows, Manhattan traffic glowed beneath the streetlights like a river of red and white. Inside, time seemed to hold still for just a second longer than it should. Ethan Caldwell was not a man who was used to waiting for an answer. Yet for reasons he couldn't explain, he found himself watching Lily Harper with a quiet curiosity that hadn't been part of his original plan. Because in that moment, something about the silence between them felt different. As if the $1,000 on the table wasn't the most important thing in the room. And somehow, the shy waitress standing beside him already knew it. The silence lingered just long enough for the people at the table to glance up from their drinks. Lily Harper finally reached forward, but not in the way anyone expected. She did not touch the money. She simply lifted the empty water glass beside Ethan Caldwell and refilled it with slow, steady precision, the clear stream catching the golden chandelier light as if nothing unusual had happened at all. When she set the bottle down, she looked at him again, calm in a way that made the moment feel strangely balanced despite the $1,000 resting between them. "If I pretend to be your wife," she said softly, "you would also have to pretend to be a man worth marrying." The sentence did not rise in volume. It did not carry anger or sarcasm. It arrived gently, almost thoughtfully, yet it landed with the weight of something far more serious than the offer that had come before it. For a second nobody spoke. One of the executives sitting beside Ethan blinked, unsure whether he had heard correctly. Another man cleared his throat and stared at the tablecloth as if the pattern had suddenly become fascinating. Across the restaurant, A waiter laughed at something unrelated, the sound drifting across the room like it belonged to a different world. Ethan Caldwell felt something unusual then. Not offense. Not embarrassment. Something closer to surprise. In 38 years he had negotiated billion-dollar contracts, outmaneuvered competitors, and convinced investors to trust him with fortunes larger than most people could imagine. Yet no one had ever answered him quite like that. Lily Harper had not rejected the money outright. She had done something stranger. She had moved the entire conversation somewhere he had not intended to go. He studied her carefully now, noticing details he had ignored when she first approached the table. The quiet steadiness in her posture. The way her hands rested lightly against the edge of the tray she carried. The absence of nervous energy that most people showed when they realized who he was. That is a very specific condition, Ethan said after a moment, his voice thoughtful rather than defensive. Lily gave a small, polite smile, the kind used in professional service when a conversation had reached its natural end. "Your dinner will be ready shortly, Mr. Caldwell," she replied, as if his proposal had simply been another unusual request from an evening full of them. Then she turned and walked toward the kitchen, her steps unhurried, leaving the $1,000 exactly where he had placed them. Ethan remained still for several seconds, his fingers resting loosely against the table. One of the men across from him leaned forward with a quiet chuckle. "That was unexpected," he murmured. Ethan did not answer immediately. His attention followed Lily as she moved through the dining room, stopping briefly at another table where an older couple studied a printed contract beside their plates. The woman looked confused, tapping a line with her finger while speaking quietly. Lily leaned down slightly, reading the page for a moment. Then she spoke to them with the same calm tone she had used with Ethan, pointing to a paragraph near the bottom and explaining something that caused both guests to nod with sudden relief. The exchange lasted perhaps 20 seconds. But Ethan noticed something unusual in the way she handled the document. Not like a server glancing politely at paperwork. Like someone who understood exactly what she was reading. Lily handed the contract back with a small reassuring smile, before continuing toward the kitchen doors, disappearing behind them as quietly as she had arrived. Ethan looked down at the untouched money on the table again. For the first time that evening, the $1,000 felt strangely unimportant. Because somewhere between the offer and the answer, the shy waitress had changed something he had not expected to change at all. The rules of the conversation. The conversation at Ethan Caldwell's table never fully recovered after Lily Harper walked away. The men sitting around him tried to return to business, discussing projections, market expansions, and a pending acquisition that would soon appear on the front page of financial news. Words continued moving across the table, but Ethan heard very little of them. His attention kept drifting toward the kitchen doors where the quiet waitress had disappeared. It was not the refusal that stayed with him. People rejected his proposals occasionally, although rarely so calmly. What unsettled him was the way she had answered. There had been no hesitation in her voice, no attempt to soften the truth, and yet she had spoken with the same polite tone she used when refilling water glasses. It had not been defiance. It had been dignity. Ethan leaned back in his chair, folding his hands loosely in front of him while the others continued speaking. From where he sat, he could see nearly the entire dining room. The Ashford room had always been designed to impress. Marble columns, velvet chairs, quiet lighting that made every table feel private while still allowing the entire room to glow with understated wealth. The kind of place where successful people came to confirm their success. Normally Ethan fit easily into that environment. Tonight something felt slightly out of balance. The kitchen doors opened again, and Lily stepped back onto the floor carrying a tray of plates. She moved through the dining room with quiet efficiency, stopping first at a table near the windows. The older couple Ethan had noticed earlier sat there, still studying the printed document beside their meal. The man looked puzzled, adjusting his glasses while rereading the same paragraph again. Lily set the plates down gently then, glanced at the page for a moment. "If you would like," she said kindly. "I think the clause you are looking for is actually 2 sections lower." Her finger moved lightly along the document until it stopped beside a single sentence. The woman leaned forward, reading carefully, and then her face brightened with relief. "That explains it," she said softly. "We thought the agreement had changed." Lily nodded politely. It did not. The wording is simply more formal than most people expect. She stepped back with a small smile, and continued across the room before either of them could ask another question. Ethan watched the exchange carefully. It had lasted less than half a minute, yet it did not feel accidental. The way Lily had read the contract, the confidence in her explanation, the precise language she used. That was not the behavior of someone casually guessing. That was the behavior of someone who understood exactly what she was reading. Across the table, one of Ethan's partners noticed where he was looking. "Interesting waitress," the man said with a quiet grin. Ethan did not smile. His eyes followed Lily as she delivered another plate, spoke briefly with a family near the bar, and then disappeared again toward the service station. Everything about her seemed ordinary at first glance. Simple uniform, soft voice, careful movements. Yet the more he watched, the more the small details began to stand out. The way she carried herself with quiet composure. The way customers listened when she spoke. And the way she had looked at him earlier, as if the $1,000 on the table had never mattered at all. Ethan reached forward slowly and picked up the folded bills he had placed there minutes earlier. He turned them once between his fingers before slipping them back into his wallet. For the first time in a very long while, he found himself curious about someone who had absolutely no interest in impressing him. The dinner plates eventually arrived, carried by another server, while Lily Harper moved quietly through the far side of the dining room. Ethan Caldwell barely noticed what had been placed in front of him. Normally, he would have commented on the preparation of the steak, the balance of flavors, the presentation. Tonight his attention remained elsewhere. Across the room, Lily stood beside the service station, reviewing a small notepad while another waiter asked her something quietly. She answered with a short explanation and pointed toward the bar where a new group of guests had just been seated. The exchange lasted only a few seconds, but the young waiter nodded immediately as if her instructions made perfect sense. Ethan noticed the pattern forming. People listened when she spoke. Not because she was loud. Not because she insisted. Because she sounded certain. That kind of certainty did not appear by accident. One of Ethan's partners finally leaned forward and lowered his voice slightly. "You are unusually quiet tonight," the man said. Ethan looked up. "Am I?" The partner gave a small smile. "You normally close a deal before dessert." Ethan glanced briefly at the contract folder sitting on the table between them. The document represented months of negotiation, a merger that would expand Caldwell Holdings into 3 additional states and increase their logistics network by nearly 40%. Any other night, he would have been dissecting every clause line by line. Tonight, his thoughts returned to something far smaller and far stranger. A waitress who had corrected a contract without hesitation. "We will finish the discussion tomorrow morning," Ethan said calmly. The men at the table exchanged quick looks of surprise, but did not argue. They had learned long ago that Ethan rarely delayed decisions without reason. The conversation shifted to lighter topics after that. Travel plans, upcoming conferences, market rumors drifting through New York's financial circles. Ethan listened politely, yet his focus remained divided. A few minutes later, Lily returned to their table carrying a small tray with fresh coffee cups. She placed them carefully beside each guest with the same calm professionalism she had shown earlier. When she reached Ethan's seat, she paused briefly. "Would you like coffee as well, Mr. Caldwell?" she asked. Her tone remained polite and neutral, as if their earlier exchange had never happened. Ethan looked at her for a moment longer than necessary. Up close, the details became clearer. The steady composure in her expression, the thoughtful way she observed people before speaking. Nothing about her suggested someone intimidated by wealth or status. "Yes," he replied quietly. She poured the coffee with steady hands, the dark liquid rising slowly inside the porcelain cup. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then Ethan said something he had not planned to say at all. "You read contracts quickly." Lily glanced at him, surprised for the first time that evening. Not startled, just aware that he had noticed. "Sometimes people need help understanding formal language," she answered gently. "It can be confusing." Ethan studied her expression carefully. She had not confirmed anything. She had not denied anything either. Another quiet pause settled between them before she placed the coffee pot back on the tray. "Enjoy your evening," she said softly. Then she stepped away and continued toward the next table. Ethan watched her disappear into the rhythm of the dining room once again. The quiet waitress moved easily through the crowd, unnoticed by most people in the restaurant. Yet the more Ethan observed her, the clearer something became. Lily Harper was hiding a story, and for the first time that night, Ethan Caldwell realized he wanted to understand what it was. The rest of the dinner moved forward with the quiet rhythm that expensive restaurants seem to master. Plates were cleared, wine glasses refilled, conversations drifting from business strategies to vacation homes and private golf clubs. Yet for Ethan Caldwell, the evening no longer felt routine. Every few minutes his attention returned to the same place. The movement of Lily Harper crossing the dining room floor with quiet precision. She worked the room with a calm focus that most people would have overlooked. To the guests, she was simply part of the background, another waitress moving between tables beneath soft lighting and polished marble columns. But the more Ethan watched, the more he noticed the small details that did not fit the image. When a young couple near the bar struggled to understand the difference between two wine selections, Lily did not simply repeat the menu description. She explained the origin of each vineyard, the difference in soil composition, the way one vintage had matured for nearly 18 months longer than the other. The couple listened carefully, then nodded as if they trusted her recommendation completely. A few minutes later, she stopped beside a businessman reviewing numbers on a tablet. He asked a brief question about the restaurant's private dining policy, but their conversation shifted when he mentioned a lease agreement for a new office space. Lily glanced at the screen for only a moment before pointing out a section regarding renewal terms that he had overlooked. The man leaned closer to read it again, then looked up with visible surprise. Lily simply gave a polite smile and continued on her way. Ethan sat quietly through all of it, his coffee cooling slowly in front of him. Across the table, his partners eventually finished their discussion and began preparing to leave. One of them placed a folder back into his briefcase and stood from his chair. "Tomorrow morning at 9, the man said. Ethan nodded without hesitation. 9 o'clock works. Chairs shifted softly as the group stood and gathered their coats. The evening's business had ended without the dramatic conclusion everyone had expected earlier. As the others walked toward the exit, Ethan remained behind for a moment longer. He did not immediately follow them. Instead, he waited, watching the room until Lily approached their table once again to clear the last of the dishes. She moved quietly, stacking plates with practiced efficiency before lifting them onto her tray. "Was everything satisfactory this evening?" she asked politely. Ethan considered the question for a moment. "The dinner was excellent," he said calmly. Lily nodded once, beginning to turn away, but Ethan spoke again before she could leave. "You are not just a waitress." The words were not a challenge. They were simply an observation spoken out loud. Lily paused, her expression thoughtful rather than defensive. For the first time that evening, she seemed to weigh her response carefully. Then she gave a small, almost amused smile. "Tonight," she said gently, "that is exactly what I am." She lifted the tray and stepped away before Ethan could reply. The kitchen doors closed quietly behind her, leaving the dining room glowing under its warm lights once again. Ethan stood there for another moment, absorbing the strange certainty he now felt. Lily Harper had answered every question he asked without truly explaining anything at all. Yet somehow the mystery surrounding her had only grown clearer. Because whatever story she was carrying, it was far larger than the simple name printed on her uniform. The dining room slowly began to thin as the night moved toward its quieter hours. Outside the tall glass windows of the Ashford Room, Manhattan traffic glowed under the streetlights while the soft hum of late evening conversations drifted between the remaining tables. Ethan Caldwell finally stepped away from his chair and walked toward the exit, yet his mind remained far from the business discussions that had filled the earlier part of the evening. Something about Lily Harper refused to leave his thoughts. It was not simply curiosity. Ethan had met brilliant people before. His company hired analysts from the best universities in the country, attorneys who specialized in corporate law, advisors who had spent decades navigating the complexities of international business. Yet none of them had stood across from him with the quiet confidence of someone who expected nothing from his wealth. As Ethan reached the front entrance, the restaurant manager approached with a polite nod. "Good evening, Mr. Caldwell. I hope everything was satisfactory tonight." Ethan paused briefly. "Your staff is impressive," he replied calmly. The manager smiled, clearly pleased with the compliment. "We try our best." Ethan considered his next words carefully. "The waitress who was serving the central section tonight. Lily Harper." The manager's expression shifted slightly in recognition. "Yes, Lily has been with us for about a year." Ethan glanced back across the dining room, where Lily now stood near the service station organizing receipts beside the register. She understands legal contracts, Ethan said quietly. The manager looked mildly surprised, then chuckled. I cannot say that I have asked. Ethan studied the scene once more before turning toward the door. Perhaps you should. The cool evening air greeted him as he stepped onto the sidewalk. A black sedan waited at the curb with its headlights reflecting off the polished pavement. His driver opened the rear door, but Ethan remained standing for a moment, looking back at the restaurant's glowing windows. Inside, Lily continued working as if nothing unusual had happened that night. Just another shift. Another table cleared. Another quiet evening beneath expensive lights. Yet Ethan could not shake the feeling that he had just encountered something rare. Not ambition. Not cleverness. Something far more unusual in the world he lived in. A person who had absolutely no interest in impressing him. He finally entered the car, and the door closed softly behind him. As the vehicle pulled into the slow current of New York traffic, Ethan reached for his phone and opened a secure message thread used only for priority research requests. His fingers paused above the screen for a moment before typing a single line. Lily Harper. Works at the Ashford Room in Manhattan. Background check requested. Priority level. Within seconds the message was sent. Ethan leaned back against the seat as the city lights passed quietly outside the window. He told himself it was simple curiosity. A business instinct triggered by something that did not fit the usual pattern. But somewhere deeper he understood the truth was slightly different. For the first time in years, someone had spoken to Ethan Caldwell without caring who he was. And now he wanted to know why. The city was quieter by the time Ethan Caldwell reached his penthouse overlooking the East River. Manhattan never truly slept, but the rhythm of the night had slowed, the distant hum of traffic blending with the steady glow of lights stretching across the skyline. Ethan stepped inside his apartment, placing his jacket over the back of a chair while the floor-to-ceiling windows reflected the city beneath him. Normally his evenings ended with a quick review of financial reports or a late call with investors in another time zone. Tonight, he did neither. Instead, he poured himself a glass of water and stood silently for a moment, his thoughts returning once again to the quiet waitress who had refused to treat him like the most powerful man in the room. Across the city, Lily Harper was finishing the last hour of her shift at the Ashford Room. The dining room had nearly emptied, leaving only a few scattered guests lingering over dessert and coffee. The chandeliers still glowed warmly above the polished marble floor, but the pace had softened. Chairs were being straightened, tablecloths adjusted, receipts tallied at the front register. Lily moved through the routine with calm familiarity, clearing the final table near the window before carrying the dishes toward the kitchen. For most of the staff the evening had been unremarkable. Just another shift serving New York's wealthy elite. Yet Lily could still feel the quiet weight of one conversation lingering in her mind. Ethan Caldwell. She had recognized the name the moment he introduced himself earlier that evening. In a city like New York, it was difficult not to know the people who dominated the business headlines. Caldwell Holdings had appeared in the news more than once during the past year, usually connected to major acquisitions or ambitious expansion projects. Lily had simply chosen not to react the way most people would. When she stepped into the small staff room behind the kitchen, she hung her apron carefully on a hook and sat for a moment beside the narrow locker that held her belongings. The room was quiet except for the distant clatter of dishes being washed in the kitchen. From her bag, she pulled out a thin folder filled with neatly organized papers. Legal textbooks. Notes written in careful handwriting. A practice exam for the New York Bar Review course. The pages showed signs of use, corners slightly worn from late nights spent studying after long shifts at the restaurant. Lily opened the folder and glanced over a page filled with legal terminology, her eyes scanning the text quickly before closing it again. For a brief moment she allowed herself a small, tired smile. Life had not unfolded the way she once imagined. But the path forward was still there. It simply required patience. Across the city, Ethan Caldwell's phone vibrated softly against the glass table beside him. A message had arrived. He picked it up immediately, his expression sharpening with quiet interest as he opened the secure report that had already begun to populate on the screen. The information was brief, but the first lines were enough to make him pause. Lily Harper, former law student, Columbia University School of Law. Academic standing, top 5% of class. Ethan read the lines twice, the faintest hint of a smile appearing at the corner of his mouth. The quiet waitress had not been pretending after all, and suddenly the mystery surrounding her had become even more interesting than he had imagined. Morning arrived slowly over Manhattan, pale sunlight reflecting across the glass towers that lined the East River. Ethan Caldwell had been awake long before the city fully stirred. His phone still rested on the kitchen counter beside the half-finished report he had received the night before. The file was not long, but every line carried weight. Lily Harper, former student at Columbia University School of Law. Academic performance in the top 5% of her class. Ethan read the lines again as if the meaning might somehow change the second time. It did not. The quiet waitress who had calmly refused his money had once been one of the most promising law students in one of the most competitive programs in the country. That was not the part that interested him most. What caught his attention was the next line. Enrollment status, withdrawn 3 years earlier. Reason not publicly listed. Ethan set the phone down and looked out across the water where early commuter ferries moved slowly through the morning haze. In the world he understood, people rarely walked away from opportunities like that without a powerful reason. Across the city, Lily Harper stepped out of a small apartment building on the Upper West Side just after 8 o'clock. The air carried the crisp edge of early autumn, cool enough to make the morning feel fresh, but warm enough for sunlight to spill comfortably across the sidewalks. She adjusted the strap of her bag over her shoulder and began walking toward the subway entrance 2 blocks away. Her routine rarely changed. A few hours of study in the morning before returning to the Ashford room for another evening shift. The quiet rhythm allowed her to keep moving forward one small step at a time. Inside the subway car, Lily found a seat beside the window and opened the same folder she had reviewed the night before. Legal notes filled the pages, highlighted sections carefully marked in yellow and blue. A stranger watching from across the aisle might have assumed she was a graduate student preparing for an exam. In many ways she still was. The difference was that Lily Harper no longer had a classroom or professors guiding her progress. She had only determination and the slow patience required to rebuild a path that had once disappeared. The train rattled gently beneath the city streets while Lily continued reading, occasionally pausing to write something new in the margins of her notes. Several stops later, she closed the folder and stepped onto the platform near Midtown, emerging into a neighborhood already alive with the energy of a new business day. Meanwhile, Ethan Caldwell was finishing his first meeting of the morning inside the sleek conference room of Caldwell Holdings. His executive team had gathered around the long glass table, presenting updates on the merger they had discussed the night before. Charts appeared on the wall screen, projections and numbers filling the air with the language Ethan knew better than almost anything else. Normally, he would have been fully engaged. Today his attention drifted briefly back to the report on his phone. A law student who disappeared from Columbia 3 years earlier. A waitress who corrected legal contracts without hesitation. The pieces fit together too precisely to ignore. As the meeting concluded, Ethan closed his laptop and stood from his chair. His assistant approached with a stack of documents for the next appointment, but Ethan raised a hand slightly. "Reschedule the afternoon," he said calmly. The assistant blinked in surprise, but nodded immediately. Ethan rarely changed his schedule once the day had begun. Ethan slipped his phone into his pocket and walked toward the elevator overlooking the city below. Somewhere across Manhattan, a quiet waitress was studying legal notes on a subway ride, unaware that the man she had refused to impress was already planning to see her again. The afternoon sun settled gently over Manhattan when Ethan Caldwell stepped out of the black sedan in front of the Ashford room. The restaurant looked different during the day. Without the evening lights and crowded tables, the large windows reflected the quiet rhythm of the city outside. Delivery trucks rolled slowly past the curb while office workers hurried along the sidewalks with coffee cups in their hands. Ethan paused for a moment before walking inside. He was not here for dinner. He was here for an answer. Inside the restaurant, the dining room was calm, the staff preparing for the evening service that would begin in a few hours. Chairs were being arranged, glasses polished, table settings aligned with careful precision. The manager from the night before recognized Ethan immediately and approached with polite surprise. "Mr. Caldwell, we were not expecting you today." Ethan gave a small nod. "I am not here for a table. The manager followed his glance across the room, where Lily Harper stood near the bar counter reviewing the reservation list. She wore the same simple uniform as the night before, her hair tied neatly back, while she spoke quietly with another server. When she looked up and saw Ethan standing there, a brief moment of recognition passed across her expression. Not shock, not excitement, just quiet understanding. She excused herself from the conversation and walked toward him with the same calm composure he remembered. "Good afternoon, Mr. Caldwell," she said politely. "The restaurant opens in a few hours." Ethan studied her for a moment before answering. "I know." He reached into his jacket pocket and removed a thin folder, placing it gently on the nearest table between them. Lily glanced down at the papers without touching them. She recognized the format immediately. Academic transcripts. University enrollment records. The top line carried her name, Lily Harper, Columbia University School of Law. Her eyes lifted slowly back to Ethan. "You had a background check done," she said softly. Ethan did not deny it. "You were one of the best students in your class," he replied. "Top 5%. The dining room remained quiet around them as the staff continued preparing tables further away. Lily looked at the documents for another second before closing the folder and sliding it back toward him. "That was a long time ago." Ethan watched her carefully. 3 years is not a long time to walk away from something like that. For the first time since he had met her, Lily paused before answering. The silence held no anger, only reflection. "Life sometimes changes the path people expect," she said gently. Ethan nodded once. "And sometimes it gives them a chance to return." He opened his briefcase and placed another document beside the folder. This one carried the letterhead of Caldwell Holdings. A formal employment offer. Junior legal advisor. Full scholarship support for completing the New York bar examination. Lily read the first lines quietly, her expression thoughtful but unchanged. "Why?" she asked finally. Ethan leaned slightly against the table, his voice calm and honest. "Because last night you reminded me of something I had forgotten." Lily looked at him with quiet curiosity. Ethan gave a faint smile. Money can hire employees, but dignity reveals real partners. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sunlight through the windows filled the room with a soft glow while the quiet sounds of preparation continued around them. Lily Harper finally closed the document and looked back at Ethan Caldwell. Her answer came with the same calm certainty she had shown the night before. "If I accept," she said softly, "it will not be because you offered money." Ethan nodded once. "I would not expect it to be." A small smile appeared on Lily's face then, the kind that carried both relief and determination. Outside the city continued moving as it always had. But inside the quiet restaurant, two very different paths had just found the same direction. And sometimes the most powerful lesson in a room full of wealth was the simplest one of all. Respect is not bought. It is earned.